At my daughter's wedding, I was wearing my best blue dress, the one I bought from the second-hand shop. I walked to my seat at the front table. Before I could sit down, her new husband grabbed my chair. He pulled it away fast. My body fell hard on the cold floor. Everyone stopped talking. Then people started laughing at me. His words cut like a knife. "Your place is down there on the ground." I didn't yell back. I just looked up at him from the floor. My knees hurt badly. My dress was dirty now. All those years I worked 2 jobs to pay for her school. All those nights I stayed up when she was sick. The shame felt heavy on my chest. Then I heard footsteps coming closer. Heavy boots walking across the shiny floor. The groom's father came late to the wedding. He stopped walking when he saw me on the ground. His face went white like he saw a ghost. He whispered very quietly, "Ma'am, is that really you?" That moment changed everything at the wedding. Changed my whole life too. Don't forget to like this video and tell me where you're watching from. The quiet that came next felt strange and scary. Nobody wanted to talk. The air felt thick like before a big storm comes. Before we continue, first let me thank you for watching Grandma Stories. Please subscribe and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We might give you a shout out in our next video. Today's special shout out goes to Ellen from Georgia. Thank you for being part of our family. Now, let me tell you everything. I was still sitting on the cold floor. One hand pushed against the smooth marble. The other hand held tight to the white tablecloth. I tried to pull myself up. My shoulder burned where I hit the ground. But that pain was nothing. The hurt in my heart was much worse. I stood up slowly and carefully, like someone who has been knocked down many times before. People stopped laughing. They looked away from me. They felt bad for laughing when someone was being mean. They moved around in their fancy chairs. They were embarrassed now. My daughter Emma. Her hand flew up to cover her mouth. Her beautiful flowers fell from her hands. White petals dropped all over the walkway. Her face was very pale. Her mouth opened but no words came out. I could see in her eyes she was torn between 2 feelings. Love for me and shame for what happened. She had dreamed about this special day for so long. She wanted to marry a man who just made her mother look foolish in front of everyone. I looked right at her. My eyes were calm and strong. She needed to see that I was okay. She needed to see the woman who raised her without ever giving up. The new husband Tyler stood tall and proud, like he had won some kind of game. His quiet laughter had stopped now. But his smile still showed he didn't care about hurting me. He turned to whisper to his friends at his table. He was spreading his mean words in soft voices. Then there was his father, the man who had just walked in. His boots had carried him across the floor like a soldier walking. He wore a nice suit now, but the way he stood gave him away. His shoulders were straight and square. His back was very straight. His eyes were always watching, even when he was surprised. He stared at me like I was someone who came back from the dead. "Ma'am, is that really you?" The words shook and cracked, but they were loud enough to break the moment open like an egg. People turned their heads toward him. The guests leaned forward in their seats. The music players put down their instruments. They looked confused instead of playing pretty songs. My daughter looked back and forth between us. Her eyes were searching for answers to questions she didn't know existed. I made myself steady. I didn't answer him yet. The weight of him knowing who I was felt like an echo from long ago. A life I had put away in old boxes and forgotten pictures. I brushed the dust off my blue dress. I straightened what pride I could gather up. I forced my legs to move forward. Each step back to the chair felt like taking back a battle 1 inch at a time. I picked up the chair myself. I set it down with a loud scraping sound on the marble floor. Then I sat down in it. I did not look at Tyler. I looked at Emma. Her eyes were shiny with tears like little pools of confusion and fear. I gave her the smallest nod. A signal that her world hadn't broken apart. Not yet. But deep inside me, I felt the first crack in the glass of the life she thought she was building. The man with the book tried to make the wedding ceremony keep going. His words stumbled over each other. But the script pulled him forward like a river. The guests moved in their seats again. They wanted to pretend nothing bad had happened. But nothing was the same as before. Not after those heavy boots. Not after that whispered recognition. I let the noise become blurry around me. I let the faces fade away. My mind traveled back to wood and thread and the smell of fresh bread. Back to another chair. One built not to hurt me but because of love. I could see it clearly in my memory. The old sewing room where I made a cushion from soft fabric. I sewed the edges until my fingers were sore and bleeding. Emma had been 7 years old. She wanted a place to sit beside me while I fixed clothes for other people. Her little legs would dangle down. Her eyes were wide as she asked about every needle and every stitch. I made her that cushion so she could belong in my world. So she could know that even in the place where I worked so hard, there was a special spot made just for her. That cushion was covered with yellow flowers because it was the only pretty fabric I could afford. She had sat on it every evening after school, swinging her small legs back and forth, handing me pins I could barely see in the dim light, asking me what each sound from the old sewing machine meant. When her father left us, that cushion was where she sat the night we cried together. Her tiny hand holding mine like she could keep our world from falling apart. That memory cut into the present moment like glass cutting skin. Because here I was many years later, sitting in another chair. But this time one that was taken away, leaving me sprawled on the ground in front of strangers. And it wasn't bad luck or sickness or tragedy that pulled my chair away. It was the man who said he loved my daughter. The man with the book kept talking. The ceremony moved forward even though nobody's heart was really in it. I barely heard the promises and vows spoken like words alone could build a marriage. My ears were ringing with a different promise. The one I made to Robert, my late husband, when Emma was born. Keep her safe always. As the crowd clapped for the kiss and raised their champagne glasses, I sat still. My hands were folded together. My eyes looked down. My body was at that wedding but my mind was somewhere else. I was already searching and already planning. Because I knew that being mean like this doesn't stop with chairs. It grows bigger and bigger. Tests how much it can take away until it takes everything from you. The music came back but softer and more careful. Like it too remembered the sound of my body hitting the marble floor. Guests tried to laugh again but the sound was empty and fake. And Tyler, he enjoyed his fake victory. He believed he had proved something important. He had proved something but not what he wanted. He had proved himself to be very small inside. The heavy boots came again. Steady and purposeful steps. The father of the new husband moved closer to me. His eyes never stopped looking at mine. When he reached my table, he bent down a little. His voice was quiet, but urgent and serious. It really is you, Nurse Patricia. The name hit me like thunder and lightning. Years fell away in 1 second. Hospital nights. The sound of machines beeping. The sharp smell of cleaning supplies. The memory of holding a man's hand while doctors worked to save his life. His voice then was rough and scared. He promised he would never forget what I did. And now here he was, older with gray hair, but the same man. His son's wedding. His son's cruelty. And fate had brought us back together after all these years. I did not answer him yet. Some truths wait for the right quiet moment, the right people watching, the right time. But I saw the knowing in his face. The change in how he stood. The weight of thankfulness ready to explode around us. The music kept playing. The bride smiled, but it looked forced and tired. The new husband strutted around like a proud rooster. The guests whispered and gossiped. But underneath it all, a strong current was building. One that would soon wash everything away. I leaned back in my chair. My fingers touched the gold necklace under my shirt. Robert's wedding ring hung there against my chest. The metal was warm and steady. A reminder of promises I kept. Of battles I fought. Of respect I earned not with money, but by never giving up. And as I sat there, hurt but not broken, I felt the story of that day start to change direction. Because sometimes what's right begins with a chair being pulled away. When the music got quieter and the guests walked outside for pictures, I slipped away quietly. A woman learns after 55 years how to disappear even when people are looking right at her. I walked through the archway of roses, past the fancy drinks and the photographers shouting orders. The noise got quieter behind me as I walked. By the time I reached the street, the cool spring air hit my face like a second wake-up call. My hand hurt where it had hit the floor earlier, a dull ache under the skin. I moved my fingers slowly. They were stiff and swollen, but they were still mine. The same hands that had taken care of sick people. The same hands that had buttoned Emma's school shirts and wiped away her tears when she was small. I walked the few blocks to where I had parked my old car. I got into the seat and let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The quiet inside was different from the quiet in that fancy hall. This was the kind of quiet that lets a woman think clearly. I put my hands on the steering wheel and stared at them. Hands tell a story in ways that faces never can. A face can lie and can smile while it plans mean things. But hands are honest. My fingers were crooked from years of giving medicine and checking on patients. My knuckles were thick from cold mornings when metal tools bit back at me. Lines crossed my palms like roads on a map. Each one marking a job, a mistake, a lesson learned. These were the hands that built a life when life tried to take everything away from me. After Robert died, people told me to marry again. They said a little girl needed a father. But I knew what Emma needed was someone steady and strong. She needed hands that would hold her steady through any storm. So I went back to the hospital. Day after day, extra shifts. Soap under my nails, sweat soaking through my uniform. Every paycheck went to food, to school clothes, to keeping the lights on and paying rent. I remember nights when my hands shook from being so tired. I would come home and fall into the old armchair. But still those tiny footsteps would walk across the floor. She would climb onto my lap and put her little hand over mine. She would whisper, "You smell like the hospital, Mom." It was never said like something bad. It was comfort to her. The scent of medicine and clean sheets was the scent of home to her. That memory made the sharp edge of shame from the wedding feel softer. I had been knocked to the floor, yes. People had laughed at me, yes. But I had survived much worse than this. And these hands, they had always lifted me back up. The next morning I went back to my sewing room. Not because I had work to do, but because the sewing room was the only place that still felt like it belonged to me. The old door creaked the way it always did. Metal complaining before giving way to my push. Inside, the air smelled of fabric softener and dust. Of thread spools stacked high and tea left too long on the hot plate. My old sewing machine sat in the center. Half-finished dress, pins catching the bits of light breaking through the windows. I had been working on that dress for months. Never in a hurry, always telling myself I'd finish it when the time felt right. I put on my work apron, cracked my knuckles, and got to work. The rhythm of it calmed my heart. Thread through needle, stitch and cut. The steady song of making something beautiful. My hands remembered the movements before my mind did. That was the thing about honest work. It gets carved into your muscle memory like words carved into stone. At one point, I sat back on the stool, wiped sweat from my forehead, and let my eyes wander around the room. On the wall above my work table hung a row of photographs, some turning yellow with age. Emma's first day of school picture. Her first bicycle with training wheels I'd bought at a garage sale. High school graduation, her cap crooked, my arm around her shoulder. And one picture of Robert in his wedding suit. His smile was the kind of light you don't forget, even when years make everything else dark and scary. I stared at Robert's photo the longest. I could almost hear his voice. "Pat," he would say, "don't let pride make you do something crazy. But don't let fear make you small and weak either." The sound of my phone buzzing on the work table cut through the memory like a knife. Picked it up. A notification from social media. I didn't use it much, but Emma had set it up for me so I could see her posts when she went on trips. This one wasn't from her. It was tagged by someone else. A friend of a friend. My thumb hesitated, then tapped the screen. And there it was. A photo of Tyler grinning in a suit that probably cost more than my car. The words underneath said, "She's perfect, sweet, trusting, and her mother. She's just a simple woman." The words burned into me like acid touching skin. Simple woman. I read them again, slower this time. Just a simple woman. That was how he saw me. How he wanted other people to see me. Not as the woman who had raised a daughter by herself. Not as the nurse who had saved lives in the hospital. Not as the seamstress who had built an honest living stitch by stitch. To him I was a joke. Something to put up with. Maybe to feel sorry for. Never to respect. I set the phone down gently, even though every feeling in my body screamed to crush it in my hand. My breathing came short and fast. For a long moment, all I could hear was the tick of the old clock above the door. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, hands pressed tight together. I let the sting pass through me. Let it turn into something else. Determination. Robert's picture caught the corner of my eye. I spoke softly, my voice scratchy in the empty sewing room. "I promised you, Robert. I promised I'd protect her." The promise didn't mean stopping Emma from making her own choices. She was a grown woman now. But it did mean she deserved to know the truth about the man she was about to marry for life. The old door rattled in the wind outside. Light moved across my sewing machine, throwing reflections on the wall like pieces of broken glass. I stood up, wiped my hands on a clean rag, and closed the laptop computer. There was work to be done. That afternoon, Emma came by my house. She always came by without calling first, the same way she had since she was a child. I heard her voice before I saw her, bright and carrying across the sound of my sewing machine. "Mom, you in here?" I stepped out from behind my work table. She was standing in the doorway, still in her work clothes. Her hair was tied back in a ponytail. Her eyes looked tired but happy. She smiled when she saw me. The kind of smile that always reminded me of her father. "I'm here, sweetheart," I said. She walked across the room, her shoes clicking against the wooden floor, and hugged me tight. I held her close and breathed in the faint scent of her perfume. The same kind Robert used to buy me for special occasions. "You left early yesterday," she said softly. "People noticed you were gone." I shrugged my shoulders. Big crowds aren't my favorite thing. She pulled back a little, searching my face with her eyes. "You're not mad, are you?" I shook my head. "I've been through worse things than that." But she looked like she didn't believe me. There was worry in her eyes, like she was trying to build a bridge between the mother she trusted and the woman she saw embarrassed yesterday. "He gets nervous sometimes," she whispered, almost talking to herself. "That's all it was. Tyler doesn't always know how to." Her words trailed off like smoke disappearing. My hands moved to her shoulders, firm but gentle. "Emma," I said. "Was he nervous, or was he testing both of us?" Her eyes got very wide. The words landed somewhere deep inside her, and I saw her stumble backward a little. I didn't push harder. I didn't need to. Sometimes planting the seed of doubt is enough to start the garden growing. We stood there in silence. The hum of the refrigerator in the corner filled the empty space between us. Then she hugged me again, tighter this time. "I love you, Mom." I kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her shampoo. "I love you too, sweetheart. Always and forever." When she left, the sewing room felt heavier, like the air was thicker and harder to breathe. But I knew I had done what I needed to do. A question had been planted in her mind, one she couldn't unhear or forget. I sat back at my work table and stared again at my hands. They trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of what was coming next. These hands had carried me through losing Robert, through grief, through decades of hard work and long nights. Now they would have to carry me through something even harder. Protecting my daughter from a man who thought respect was something you could buy with a credit card. I picked up my sewing, wiped the dust away, and set my tools in perfect order. The day was slipping into evening. Shadows stretched across the sewing room floor like long fingers. The old clock kept ticking on and on. I whispered again to Robert's photograph on the wall. "Whatever comes next, I'll keep my promise to you. And as the light grew dimmer, I folded up my work for the day. The invitation came through Emma. She called me one morning, her voice brighter than it had been in days. "Mom, Tyler wants to take us to dinner. Just the three of us. He thinks it will be good for you two to get to know each other better." I paused, needle still in my hand, thread tangled around my fingers. My sewing machine's parts glinted under the room light like scattered puzzle pieces. Dinner with him. I knew this was coming, but knowing something doesn't mean being ready for it. I said yes because when your daughter asks something like this, you always say yes. That evening, I pulled my only good dress from the closet. Navy blue with small white flowers, the one I had worn to Emma's college graduation. I ironed it carefully, paying extra attention to the seams I had sewn myself when they began to come apart. The belt was a little old-fashioned, but it was clean, and that mattered more to me than being stylish. On the bus ride into the big city, I caught my reflection in the window. Gray had taken over the brown in my hair. The face staring back was lined and weathered, carrying years of worry and hard work. My hands, a nurse's hands and a seamstress's hands, felt out of place among diamond rings and gold watches. By the time I arrived, the Golden Spoon restaurant was glowing against the city night like a palace made of glass and gold. A man in white gloves opened the door with a practiced smile that felt empty and fake. Inside, fancy light fixtures dripped sparkles across marble floors. The air smelled faintly of expensive spices and polished wood. Conversations floated through the room, hushed and careful, the language rich people use when they talk about money. Emma waved from a corner booth, her smile wide enough to calm the storm brewing in my chest. Beside her, Tyler didn't stand up until the very last second. His movements were slow and deliberate, like he was acting in a play. He held out his hand to me, limp and cold, held just long enough to avoid being completely rude. "Mrs. Collins." I nodded back. "Tyler." We sat down at the table. Emma reached across to squeeze my hand with both of hers. "Mom rebuilt her sewing machine from old parts," she told him with pride shining in her voice. Tyler looked at me, then at his expensive watch, like he was calculating how much such work was worth in dollars and cents. Dangerous hobby for someone your age, wouldn't you say? Different generations take different risks, I suppose. I let his words pass by me like wind. The waiter came over with menus in his hands, but Tyler waved him away without looking. "Wine first." The 2009 red wine bottle service. He didn't ask if we wanted wine. He just told the waiter what to bring. The flow of the evening shifted quickly after that. First there was polite small talk. Emma guided the conversation, trying to build a bridge between two people who refused to meet in the middle. But it didn't take long before Tyler's mask began to slip and fall away. He leaned back in his chair, fingers pressed together like a church steeple, looking at me like I was a case file to study. "So, Mrs. Collins, you work with your hands. That must be satisfying." "I'm a seamstress," I said simply. "I fix things that are broken and make things that are beautiful." "How refreshing." His smile was all teeth and no warmth. "I'm in financial services. Portfolio management. High-stakes investments. Different world, I suppose." "Different doesn't mean better," I said calmly. Emma glanced back and forth between us, nervous laughter caught in her throat like a butterfly trapped in a jar. She squeezed my hand again as if to remind me to be patient and kind. The food arrived on plates arranged like art pieces. Portions so small they looked like decorations on the white dishes. I cut into mine slowly, chewing with care, more focused on listening to the conversation than tasting the expensive food. Tyler continued talking. "Your daughter has told me about your neighborhood." "Brooklyn, yes. So authentic. Very working class. I imagine the sense of community must make up for the limitations." "What limitations?" My voice stayed steady, though my knuckles turned white against my fork handle. He smiled wider like a cat that caught a mouse. "Oh, nothing specific. Just that once you experience certain standards of living, it becomes difficult to appreciate simpler pleasures. But that's generational, I think. Emma jumped in quickly. Mom appreciates nice things too. Of course she does. Tyler interrupted smoothly, his voice like oil poured on water. Different perspectives, that's all. He turned his calculating eyes back to me. Tell me, Mrs. Collins, what do you consider your greatest achievement in life? The question was a trap, and I knew it. If I spoke with pride, he would make it small. If I answered humbly, he would see it as proof of small dreams and low goals. Raising Emma, I said without hesitation. Admirable. He nodded, but his eyes showed he was planning something. Single motherhood must have been challenging. Limited resources, I imagine. No wonder Emma appreciates having someone who can provide properly for her future. Emma's face turned red. Tyler, please stop. What? I'm acknowledging your mother's sacrifices. And now those difficult days are over. Emma deserves the finer things in life. Don't you agree, Mrs. Collins? My jaw tightened like a spring wound too tight. I gripped my napkin until the fabric nearly tore in my hands. Around us, crystal glasses clinked softly together. Laughter rose from other tables like bubbles in champagne. But here in our corner, the air was heavy with unspoken war. I simply believe in treating people with respect, I said quietly. Respect? Tyler raised one eyebrow like a question mark. I thought I was being quite respectful. After all, I'm allowing tradition to continue. Some men in my position might insist on modern arrangements. But I understand the importance of letting older generations feel useful and needed. Emma's wine glass trembled in her hand like a leaf in the wind. Please stop this. Stop what, darling? I'm just having an honest conversation with your mother. The waiter returned then, a leather folder in his hand. He placed the check carefully by Tyler's elbow like it was made of glass. Tyler picked it up, opened it with exaggerated surprise, and then slid it across the table toward me like a chess piece. Tradition, he said softly. The bride's mother pays for the engagement dinner. The number stared up at me like an angry face. $347. More than a week's worth of groceries from my little corner store. Emma's face lost all its color. Tyler, that's not necessary at all. Nonsense, sweetheart. Your mother wants to show her support. Don't you, Mrs. Collins? The silence stretched tight like a rubber band about to snap. Other diners laughed and talked, unaware of the quiet humiliation happening at our table. I reached for my purse. The leather was old and worn smooth, a working woman's purse that had seen many years. My hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of dignity pressed against pride like two stones grinding together. I placed my credit card down on top of the check. It's fine, sweetheart. Excellent. Tyler leaned back in his chair, looking triumphant like a king on his throne. The waiter returned moments later with the receipt for me to sign. I wrote my name carefully, each letter a small battle I refused to lose. The tip hurt my budget, but I gave it anyway because dignity sometimes costs more than money. Thank you for dinner, Tyler said brightly, as though he had done me a great favor. I'm sure Emma appreciates seeing how well her two favorite people get along. The casual cruelty of it burned like fire. The way he set up the humiliation while wearing the mask of charm and politeness. It burned deep, but I did not let the pain show on my face. Emma's eyes glistened with shame and anger, but she said nothing. She couldn't not hear, not now. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the marble floor. The sound echoed louder than it should have, like a gunshot in the quiet restaurant. I put my coat over my arm, nodded once to my daughter, and walked toward the exit with my head held high. Outside, the night was sharp and cold. The wind cut through my good dress like tiny knives. Neon lights reflected off wet pavement like scattered jewels. I drew a long breath, letting the city's noise wash over me like a cleansing river. Taxis honked their horns. People shouted to each other. The endless song of the big city played all around me. But all I could hear were Tyler's words echoing in my head. Your place is on the floor. Your mother pays. Simple woman. I walked slowly down Fifth Avenue, my heels clicking against the sidewalk. The cold air bit at my face like tiny insects. Each step carried both humiliation and resolve, because I knew then that Tyler's arrogance was a test to see how much I would take. And men like him, when you let them win once, they never stop pushing and taking. I reached the subway entrance and went down into the noise of trains rumbling like thunder underground. On the ride back to Brooklyn, I kept my eyes on my reflection in the darkened window. Gray hair, tired eyes, hands marked by years of honest work. A simple woman maybe, but not weak. By the time I got off at my stop, the night had grown quieter. The streets of my neighborhood were familiar, worn, and honest like old friends. Porch lights glowed warm and yellow. Dogs barked in distant yards, and the smell of someone cooking dinner lingered in the air like a hug. I walked up the steps to my little house, unlocked the door and stepped inside. The old clock ticked steadily on the wall. On the mantel, Robert's photograph smiled at me. His eyes filled with joy and faith in our love. I touched the chain around my neck, feeling the warmth of his wedding ring against my skin. I promised, I whispered to his picture. I promised I'd protect her always. And with that, I closed the door on the night behind me. It was 3 nights after the dinner when I first heard the pounding on my door. I had just turned off the lamp in my living room. The old house creaked the way it always did before settling into peaceful silence. I was about to head upstairs to bed when the knocking came. No, not knocking. A fist hammering against the wood so hard the door frame rattled like teeth chattering. I froze for a second. Visitors don't come without calling first in my neighborhood. Not at that late hour. My first thought was trouble. My second thought was Tyler. The pounding came again, even louder and angrier. My porch light flicked on automatically, catching the figure outside. Through the glass in my door I saw him. Expensive coat, hair perfect, face twisted with something rawer than the polished charm he had worn at dinner. I opened the door slowly, deliberately, like I was in no hurry at all. He didn't wait for an invitation. He pushed past me, the scent of cologne mixed with cigarette smoke trailing behind him like a bad memory. His shiny shoes struck my hardwood floor like gunshots. He spun around in the center of my living room, taking it all in with a sneer. The old couch, the family photos on the wall, the mantel with Robert's picture. "We need to talk," he said, his voice loud and demanding. "Now." I closed the door quietly behind me. "About what? Don't play dumb with me." His voice was sharp, louder than it needed to be. Like volume could hide the crack in his confidence. "Emma's been different since that dinner. She's asking questions. She's having doubts about us. I know you've been poisoning her mind against me." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over my chest. Poisoning her or telling her the truth? He stopped pacing around my living room. His hands clenched at his sides like he wanted to hit something. "You told her I was disrespectful. That I don't value family. That I'm some kind of monster." I didn't move from my spot by the door. I didn't raise my voice at all. I told her what I saw with my own eyes. Nothing more, nothing less. His laugh sounded like glass breaking. "Right. The concerned mother act. Very touching." He stepped closer, trying to use his height the way some men use weapons to scare people. But I'd seen real fear before. This was just pretending. "Here's what you're going to do," he said, pointing his finger at me like a gun. "Tomorrow you're going to call her. You're going to apologize. You'll tell her you were wrong about me, that you overreacted like an old woman." I held his gaze, calm as still water. "Or what?" The question hung in the air like smoke. His face turned red, the polish cracking like old paint. "Or you'll find out what it's like to lose her forever." The words came out raw and desperate. For a moment, silence filled the room heavier than his empty threat. I studied him carefully. This was not confidence. This was fear dressed up in anger. This was a boy who had never been told no, now facing the possibility that someone might reject him. Young man, I said quietly, I think you're forgetting where you are. Am I? He pulled his phone from his pocket, waving it like a weapon. One call, one text. I tell her you threatened me. That you're jealous and trying to break us apart. Who do you think she'll believe? Her fiancé or her bitter old mother? Something in my stillness made him hesitate. For the first time since he barged through my door, uncertainty flickered in his eyes like a candle in the wind. I didn't move, didn't raise a hand, but I shifted my stance just enough to let him feel the steadiness of a woman who had carried heavier burdens than his empty threats. He took half a step backward. You don't understand, he muttered, his voice rising again like a child having a tantrum. I've worked too hard to get here. I won't let some old seamstress ruin everything I've built. And what exactly have you built? I asked, my voice still low and even. Success. Money. A future. He gestured around my modest living room as if it were evidence in a courtroom. Things you wouldn't understand. Real achievement. Not this. I looked around slowly. The couch was worn by years of stories told and tears shed. The dining table where Emma had once spread her homework while I cooked simple dinners. The photo of Robert in his wedding suit. I looked back at him with steady eyes. This, I said, is a daughter who knows she's loved without conditions. This is bedtime stories, scraped knees, piano recitals, and college tuition paid with overtime hours. This is what real achievement looks like. Sentimental garbage, he snapped, but his voice had lost its sharp edge. The world doesn't run on bedtime stories, old lady. It runs on power, money, and knowing how to use both. Maybe your world does, I replied. I shifted slightly, not threatening, just enough to remind him whose house he was standing in. But Emma comes from a different world than yours. He was sweating now despite the cool evening air drifting through my open window. His collar stuck to his neck with dampness. She'll choose me, he said, his words sounding more like begging than declaring. When it comes down to it, she'll choose the life I can give her over this. Will she? The question hung heavier than my silence. For a moment I thought he might try to hit me. His whole body tensed up, fists curling into tight balls. But something held him back. Maybe the way I stood without fear. Maybe some instinct deep inside warning him he was swimming in water too deep for him. This isn't over, he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction like a deflated balloon. Emma's mine. She chose me, not you. Emma isn't property, I said firmly. She doesn't belong to anyone. He turned sharply, stormed to my door, then looked back one last time. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Actually, I said softly, I think I know exactly who you are. He slammed my door behind him so hard the whole house shook. His car engine roared down the street, fading into the distance like a bad dream. The house fell silent again. The kind of silence that comes after a storm passes. The only sounds were the clock's tick and the refrigerator's quiet hum. I walked to the mantel where Robert's photo smiled back at me, unchanging and eternal. I reached under my shirt and pulled the chain with his ring into the open. The gold was warm against my palm like it held his touch. Robert, I whispered, I promised you I would keep her safe. I stayed there for a long time, staring at the ring until the sound of Mrs. Martinez's television drifted faintly through the thin wall between our houses. Life outside moved on like it always does. But inside this house, a line had been drawn in the sand. The next morning, my neighborhood was waking up when I stepped onto my front porch. The air smelled of coffee and fresh bread from the corner bakery. Children hurried to school, their laughter a reminder of simpler, happier days. I sat on my front steps with a cup of coffee in my hands and thought about Tyler's angry words. He believed respect could be purchased like groceries. That power was louder than love. That my daughter could be owned like a piece of furniture. But love doesn't work that way. Respect doesn't either. I watched the sun climb higher in the sky, casting light across the row houses lined with peeling paint and flowers growing in mismatched pots. Honest houses, houses built by hands like mine. And I knew then that this wasn't just about Emma's heart. It was about something bigger. About proving once again that dignity cannot be stripped away by arrogance and money. The battle hadn't even truly begun yet. I didn't sleep the night Tyler came pounding at my door like an angry storm. His voice still echoed through my house long after his car roared away down the street. Threats have a way of lingering in the air even when you know the person behind them is more noise than real danger. I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, turning lazy circles, thinking about Emma and the trap she was walking into with her eyes wide shut. By dawn, I had decided I would not forbid her from loving him. Forbidding only drives love deeper underground where it can't be reached. But I would hold up a mirror. I would let her see what I saw clearly. That afternoon I drove to her apartment building. It was glass and steel, 20 floors above a street lined with fancy shops and wine bars. A world away from my block in Brooklyn, where neighbors shouted friendly greetings across porches and kids played games until the streetlights came on. I parked my old car at the curb. Its rust and dents looked out of place among the imported cars gleaming in the parking garage entrance. The doorman recognized me from previous visits. He offered a polite nod as I stepped into the lobby. Its marble floors shone so bright they reflected the chandeliers hanging above like mirrors. I rode the elevator up, listening to the quiet hum and rehearsing words in my head. But I knew they would come out differently once I saw her sweet face. She opened the door before I could knock. "Mom." Her smile was quick but thin, like it had been practiced in front of a mirror. She stepped aside to let me into her apartment. Her place was spotless, decorated with the precision of a magazine photograph. Everything matched perfectly, everything coordinated, but to me it felt more like a showroom than a home. No mismatched coffee mugs, no cluttered shelves of half-finished books. It was beautiful but cold, like a hotel room. She led me to her sofa, a sleek piece of furniture that looked more suited for photographs than actual comfort. I sat carefully, leaning forward with my hands clasped together. She curled her legs beneath her the way she had since she was a little girl, making herself smaller when she felt uncertain about something. "You didn't call after the dinner," she said softly. "I wanted to see you in person," I answered. Her eyes searched mine like she was looking for hidden meaning. "You look tired, Mom." I smiled faintly. "I've been worse." Silence stretched between us until she filled it with nervous words. "Tyler said you've been upset. That you don't understand him yet." I let her words hang in the air like laundry on a line. Then I asked quietly, "Was he nervous that night at dinner, or was he testing both of us?" The question landed heavily in the quiet room. Her eyes flickered, darting away to the window where the city stretched out in endless steel and glass. "He was just," she began, then stopped. Her voice searched for solid ground to stand on. "Emma." I leaned forward. "Look at me, sweetheart." She did reluctantly. I saw the little girl who used to crawl into my lap when thunder scared her. The teenager who slammed doors but always came back to say sorry. The young woman who walked across a graduation stage while I clapped until my hands hurt. "A man who truly loves you would never deliberately embarrass your mother," I said evenly. "He would not mock the neighborhood where you grew up. He would not slide a bill across the table just to watch me struggle to pay it." Her face flushed red. "Mom, maybe it was just a misunderstanding." "Was it? Or was it a test to see how much disrespect we'd swallow before we said enough?" She pressed her lips together in a thin line. I could see her mind working, pulling up memories she had pushed aside. "He's been good to me," she whispered finally. "He brings me flowers. He listens when I talk. He makes plans for our future together. I don't doubt he can be charming when he wants to be. Predators often are." Her eyes widened, a mix of anger and fear crossing her face. "Don't call him that." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue back. I let the silence stretch until it did the work for me. She shifted on the couch, hugging her knees tighter, her gaze unfocused as though she were replaying conversations in her head like old movies. "There was a moment last week," she said softly. At dinner with his work colleagues, one of them told a story about her husband getting fired from his job. I felt bad for her and said so. But Tyler leaned over and whispered that it was pathetic. He said people who lose their jobs only have themselves to blame. Her voice cracked like thin ice. I told myself he was just being insensitive. But now I'm wondering if that insensitivity isn't an accident. Tears gathered in her eyes like morning dew. She wiped them quickly, frustrated with herself for crying. I don't want to believe it, she said. I know, I replied gently. I reached across the space between us and took her hand in mine. It's hard to believe when you've given your heart to someone. She squeezed my hand tightly as if she was afraid I would let go and float away. What if I made a terrible mistake, Mom? Then you learn from it. Mistakes don't define who you are. How you respond to them does. Her shoulders slumped like she was carrying a heavy backpack. I could feel the weight pressing down on her small frame. I love him, she whispered, as though saying it out loud would make it less fragile and breakable. And I believe you do, I said. But love isn't enough if it isn't returned in the same way you're giving it. She stared at me for a long time, eyes wet and searching for something to hold on to. I saw how he looked at you at that dinner, she admitted finally. That wasn't nervousness, was it? No, sweetheart. It wasn't. Her tears spilled over like water from an overfull cup. She buried her face in her hands, shoulders trembling like leaves in a storm. I pulled her into my arms the way I had when she was 8 and scraped her knee, when she was 15 and her first boyfriend broke her heart. I stroked her hair and whispered the same thing I always did when she was hurting. You're not alone. You'll never be alone as long as I'm breathing. Minutes passed, maybe more. The city moved outside with honking horns and wailing sirens, life pressing forward like it always does. But in that apartment time slowed down like honey. When she finally pulled back from my arms, her eyes were red but clearer. She looked at me with something new growing inside her. Uncertainty, yes, but also awakening. What do I do now? She asked. Only you can decide that, I said. But remember this. You deserve someone who values what you value. Someone who cherishes your heart, not someone who dismisses it. She nodded slowly, taking it all in like medicine that tastes bad but helps you heal. I kissed her forehead, tasting the salt of her tears on my lips. I love you, Mom, she whispered. I love you too, my darling. More than you'll ever know. When I left her building, the sun was setting behind the skyline, painting the glass towers in shades of fire. The city looked beautiful but brittle, like one hard knock could shatter it into a million pieces. In the elevator, I stared at my reflection again. Gray hair, tired eyes, but steady and strong. My hands, worn and scarred from years of honest work, would carry her through whatever came next. As I stepped onto the busy street, the night air wrapped around me like a familiar blanket. The traffic roared past me. Neon lights flickered on and off. Strangers brushed past me without seeing. But I felt only the weight of her hug still lingering on my shoulders like a blessing. I walked back to my old car slowly, taking my time. The old clock at home would be ticking, waiting patiently, reminding me that time doesn't pause while families wrestle with painful truths. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles pale in the dim streetlight glow. Through the windshield, the city stretched endlessly into the night. Somewhere up there in that glass tower, my daughter sat in her perfect apartment, questioning the man she thought she loved. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the smallest crack appearing in the glass of their fairy tale illusion. Whispers travel faster than truth sometimes, faster than lies. They slip through back doors of coffee shops, float across beauty salon chairs, hum low in church pews. And in a neighborhood like mine, whispers are like money that everyone trades. Started small. A neighbor stopped me outside the corner grocery store. Her eyes flickered with discomfort before she finally said what was on her mind. I heard your daughter's fiancé was bragging downtown about moving her out of Brooklyn. About never coming back once they're married. He laughed like he was talking about throwing away old clothes. I nodded, said nothing back, but the words stuck to me like glue. A week later, at the corner bakery, Mrs. Rodriguez handed me my usual loaf of bread. Her hands were shaking slightly. "I overheard something at the cafe near her office," she whispered like she was telling a secret. "That young man said Brooklyn was a place you grow out of like old shoes." He said it with a smirk on his face. I thanked her and left a larger tip than usual in her jar. Each whisper chipped away at the picture Emma was painting for herself. The picture of a man who was ambitious, charming, and forward-looking. What the whispers painted instead was arrogance and disdain, the kind of casual cruelty that grows when no one calls it by its real name. I tried not to let it eat me up inside. I worked longer hours in my sewing room, mending clothes and hemming dresses, even when there wasn't much work to do. My hands needed to stay busy, needed thread between my fingers to stop them from shaking with anger at the thought of him. One evening, as the sun set behind the row houses, painting the sky a soft orange, I sat on my front porch with a cup of tea. The street was quiet. Kids were inside finishing homework. Dogs barked at shadows moving in the growing darkness. My neighbor Maria joined me, lowering herself into the chair beside mine. Army wife like I used to be, though we never talked much about those difficult days. She stared into her coffee cup, then said, "People are talking, Patricia. Not in a good way." "What do you mean?" She shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Word is Tyler called Emma an investment. Like she was stocks or bonds, not a person." The word stung like a bee. Investment. Something you put money into, not someone you love with your whole heart. Maria glanced at me with worried eyes. "You didn't hear it from me." He nodded. "I understand completely." That night I sat at my kitchen table long after the clock struck midnight. The house creaked with the sounds of age and settling. The refrigerator hummed quietly, and the city outside carried on with its endless noise. I turned the word over in my mind like a stone. Investment. Cold and calculated. A business term, not a word of love and affection. The next day confirmed my worst fears. I had driven into Manhattan to buy fabric for a special dress order. Parking near the office towers was impossible, so I found myself sitting at a red light while I waited for traffic to clear. And then I saw him. Taylor. He stood on the sidewalk with his phone pressed to his ear, his other hand waving dismissively as though the whole world was bothering him. I rolled down my window slightly, not meaning to listen in, but his voice carried sharp and confident across the busy street. "No, trust me," he was saying to whoever was on the phone. "She's perfect for what I need. Sweet, trusting." He paused, then continued. "And her mother is simple. Exactly the kind of woman who won't interfere with my plans. She's an investment, that's all. A stepping stone." My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles turned white as paper. The traffic light changed colors. A car horn blared behind me impatiently, but I couldn't move. Investment. He hung up his phone, straightened his expensive tie, and disappeared into a glass tower like he owned the world. I sat there with my heart pounding, the word echoing in my chest louder than the horns behind me. Finally I pulled away, the city blurring past me, my thoughts louder than the car engine. Back home I went straight to my sewing room. My machine sat waiting, thread spools glinting under the fluorescent light. I grabbed my scissors and started cutting fabric that didn't need cutting. Anything to keep my hands busy, to keep the fury from spilling over like boiling water. Later, I sat at my work table staring at Robert's photograph on the wall. His eyes were steady and kind, his smile warm, a reminder of a love that was never an investment, never a stepping stone, but the whole beautiful journey. "Robert," I whispered to his picture, "I promised I'd keep her safe from harm." The sewing room clock ticked loudly, each second marking time toward the wedding day. The sound filled the silence like a heartbeat, steady and relentless. That evening Emma called me. Her voice was lighter than it had been, but I could hear strain underneath it like a crack in a wall. "Mom, the wedding invitations are finally out. It's really happening. Can you believe it?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. I can believe it, sweetheart. You'll be there, right? You wouldn't miss it. Always, my darling. Always. She hesitated, and I heard her take a deep breath. Mom, you don't dislike him that much, do you? I closed my eyes, pressed the phone closer to my ear. I dislike what he becomes when he thinks no one important is watching. Silence on her end of the line. Then a soft sigh that sounded like air leaking from a balloon. Sometimes I wonder if I'm blind to things I should see, she said quietly. I didn't answer right away. Some truths you can't force into words, like trying to catch water in your hands. You can only let them echo until they're ready to be heard clearly. After we hung up, I sat in my dark sewing room with only the street light coming through my window. The clock ticked louder than ever, each second carrying me closer to a day that would decide everything that mattered. Investment. The word would not leave my mind. I knew then that the battle wasn't just for Emma's heart. It was for her soul, her sense of worth as a human being. And I would fight it not with fists or shouting matches, but with truth, patient and unyielding, until even she could no longer ignore what was right in front of her. The whispers had become a storm, and storms, once they gather strength, don't pass quietly. The clock ticked on and on. The whispers about Tyler had turned into a constant buzzing inside my head. Every corner of my neighborhood carried another version of the same story. Arrogance, disdain, words sharp enough to cut without leaving visible marks. And then his voice from that phone call played again and again in my memory. She's an investment. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself walking the empty streets of Brooklyn. The air smelled of rain on pavement. Street lights glowed pale yellow, casting long shadows of garbage cans and bicycles chained to metal fences. I passed the old bar on the corner, its neon sign buzzing faintly, and through the open door, I saw a familiar face from long ago. Janet. We had worked together at the hospital 15 years ago. Back then, she was the kind of nurse who brought calm into chaos, the one you wanted beside you when everything was falling apart. Life had turned her into a social worker now. Quiet but effective. I hadn't seen her in years, but I walked through that door like no time had passed at all. She looked up from her coffee cup, blinked, and then smiled wide. Patricia Collins. Well, I'll be blessed. I slid onto the stool beside her. It's been too long, Janet. Way too long. She studied my face, the lines, the gray hair. You look like a woman with the weight of the world on her shoulders. I chuckled without any humor in it. You're not wrong about that. The bartender brought me a cup of coffee without me asking. Janet leaned closer. Talk to me, honey. So I did. I told her about Tyler. About the dinner and the checks slid across the table like a challenge. About the night he pounded at my door with threats and angry words. About the whispers floating around the neighborhood. The word investment hanging in the air like poison gas. Janet listened without interrupting, only nodding occasionally. Her social worker mind was storing details. Her nurse's heart understanding the unspoken pain. When I finished, she sat back and let out a long breath. You don't fight fire with fire, Patricia. You let it burn itself out. I frowned, not understanding. Meaning? She leaned in closer. Men like Tyler feed on reaction. You shout, you cry, you lose the game. What you do is stand still and patient. You let his own arrogance eat him up from the inside. It always does, eventually. I sipped my coffee, letting the bitterness steady my nerves. Patience I can handle. I survived Robert's death, grief, and decades of long nights working double shifts. But watching my daughter walk into a trap. Patience feels like giving up. Janet seemed to read my thoughts like an open book. I'm not saying do nothing. I'm saying be smart about it. You don't swing fists anymore at our age. You gather information. You prepare for the right moment. And when the time comes, you let the truth speak for itself. I nodded slowly, understanding. And if she doesn't see it until it's too late, then you catch her when she falls. That's what mothers do. Silence settled between us, filled by the clink of coffee cups and the low murmur of other late-night customers. I stared at my hands on the counter, scarred and worn, hands that had held syringes and sewed countless stitches. Could they hold Emma steady through this storm too? Janet broke the silence. There's something else you should know. Her tone sharpened, social worker replacing old friend. A few months back, I handled a case involving financial fraud downtown. Guess whose name came up in the paperwork? I didn't need to guess. Janet continued. Tyler Hale. He was involved in some shady investment deals that nearly cost his firm millions. They covered it up to protect the company's reputation, but the people inside know his record isn't as clean as he pretends. I let the information settle like sediment in still water. Emma didn't know any of this. Of course she didn't. He would never let her see behind his perfect mask. You're telling me he's not just arrogant, he's dishonest too. Janet nodded seriously. And men like that always leave a trail of damage. Always. I leaned back in my chair, breathed out slowly. For the first time in weeks, I felt something sharp and focused growing inside me. Not rage, not despair, but strategy. You still have that instinct, Janet said, smiling slightly. The one that reads situations. Don't lose it now. I looked at her closely. Really looked. Same steady eyes as all those years ago when emergencies came through the hospital doors and she told me to breathe deeply and hold the line. I won't lose it, I said firmly. We clinked our coffee cups together, a nurse's toast in civilian clothes. When I left the bar, the rain had stopped falling. The streets glistened under the streetlights, puddles reflecting bits of neon like scattered diamonds. I walked home slowly, thinking about Janet's words. Patience, strategy, truth. At my house, I hung up my coat, sat in my living room, and looked at Robert's picture. I told him softly, I have help now. I'm not fighting this battle alone. The clock ticked on. The next morning I called Emma. She answered quickly, her voice bright but tired. Mom, hi. Hi, sweetheart. Just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. She hesitated for a moment. Tyler says you still don't like him very much. I smiled faintly, even though she couldn't see it. That's not exactly news. She sighed like she was carrying something heavy. Mom, he really is trying his best. Is he? Or is he just performing for an audience? Silence stretched between us. Emma, I said gently, I don't want to control your choices. I just want you to look closely at what's really there. Really, really look. She didn't answer, but I could hear her breathing change, uneven like someone carrying too much weight on their shoulders. I'll think about it, she said finally, her voice small. That's all I'm asking for, sweetheart. We hung up the phone. I sat there with it still in my hand and knew the cracks in her fairy tale were getting wider. She was beginning to see what I had seen all along. That night, I wrote down everything Janet had told me. Names, dates, hints of financial trouble and dishonesty. I locked the paper in a tin box in my bedroom closet, not to use yet, but to keep safe and secure, like ammunition stored for the right moment when it would be needed most. My sewing machine sat silent beside me, thread catching the dim light from my desk lamp. I touched the handle gently, whispered, We're not finished fighting yet. Outside my window, the neighborhood settled into sleep like a blanket being pulled up. Inside, the clock ticked on, a relentless countdown to the wedding day that was coming whether I was ready or not. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel alone in this battle. I had an ally, someone who understood the stakes. The night before a wedding is supposed to be restless for the bride, not the mother. Yet there I was, pacing my living room as the city outside settled into its rhythm of car horns and distant sirens, and the occasional laughter drifting up from the street below. The house smelled faintly of the coffee I had brewed hours earlier, now gone cold in the pot. The clock on my mantel ticked too loudly, like it was counting down to an execution. My phone rang suddenly. Emma's name glowed across the screen like a beacon. Mom, she said the moment I answered. Her voice was thin and breaking like ice cracking. Can you come over right now? No hesitation, I said. I grabbed my coat and keys. The streets blurred under the wheels of my old car as I drove into Manhattan as fast as I safely could. When I reached her building, the doorman looked at me with something softer than his usual professional politeness. "Third time this week," he murmured, almost talking to himself as he called the elevator for me. His eyes carried sympathy, though he didn't say anything more. Emma opened her apartment door before I could knock. Her eyes were red and swollen, cheeks streaked with tears. She looked younger than she had in years, as though grief had peeled back all the layers of adulthood like old paint. "Mom!" She collapsed into my arms before another word could form. I held her tight, feeling the tremor in her shoulders, the same way I had held her when she was small and the nightmares came to visit. "What happened, sweetheart?" I asked gently once she pulled back enough to breathe normally. She wiped at her face with the back of her hand. "I don't know if I can go through with the wedding tomorrow." The words cut deeper than any knife. I guided her to her sofa, sat beside her close enough to touch. She twisted her engagement ring nervously around her finger, the diamond catching the low light like a shard of ice. "What changed your mind?" Her voice shook like a leaf in the wind. "He was so angry tonight, Mom. Not at me but at his cousin. We were having dinner with some family. Tyler just exploded. Said things that made everyone at the table go completely quiet. He called his cousin weak for not making partner at his law firm yet. He said, people who stay in middle-class neighborhoods are failures and losers." She looked up at me with eyes wide and terrified. "Mom," he sounded like a complete stranger, like someone I'd never met before. Kept my voice calm and steady. "Or maybe he sounded like who he's been all along, and you're just hearing it clearly now." Her bottom lip trembled like she might start crying again. "What if you're right? What if I've been blind this whole time?" I took her hands in mine, my rough skin against her smooth palms. "Emma, love isn't blind. Love chooses to see the best in people. That's not a weakness, sweetheart. That's your greatest strength." She broke down then, sobbing so hard her whole body shook like she was caught in an earthquake. I let her cry, let the storm pass through her while I sat steady, the anchor she had always needed in rough waters. After a while, she pulled back from my arms, whispering through her tears, "I don't want to marry someone who makes me feel ashamed of who I am and where I come from." Before I could answer her, there was a soft knock at her apartment door. Not Tyler's angry pounding, but a gentler rhythm. Emma hesitated, wiped her eyes, then opened the door carefully. Standing there was Helen, Tyler's aunt, a woman I had met only briefly at a family gathering. She was older, refined, with eyes that missed nothing important. "I hope I'm not bothering you," she said, stepping inside when Emma nodded. "I just needed to speak with both of you. Mrs. Collins, I'm glad you're here too." Her voice carried weight, the kind that comes from years of seeing truths people prefer to ignore. "I've watched Tyler grow up," she continued, settling into a chair carefully. "He's always been ambitious and driven. But lately, there's something darker growing in him. Something that worries me deeply." Emma's breath caught in her throat. "Aunt Helen, why didn't you say anything before now?" "Because I wasn't completely sure of what I was seeing. But tonight, hearing the way he spoke at dinner about family, I can't stay quiet anymore." She turned her serious eyes to me. "You were right to be concerned about him, Mrs. Collins. He doesn't respect what he can't control or own." The room went completely still and quiet. Emma stared at her aunt, shock mixing with relief on her tear-stained face. "So it's not just me imagining things," she whispered. "No, darling," Helen said firmly. "It's not just you at all." Emma looked at me then, eyes searching for guidance and direction. I spoke softly. "The choice is still yours to make, sweetheart. But at least now you can see more clearly what you're choosing." She nodded, fresh tears starting to brim in her eyes again. Helen reached over and squeezed her niece's hand gently. "Whatever happens tomorrow, know that you are loved and supported. Real love doesn't demand you become smaller." The three of us sat in silence, the city's glow seeping through the tall windows, car horns distant, footsteps echoing in the hallway outside. For the first time, Emma wasn't alone in her doubts and fears. She had me, and now, unexpectedly, someone from Tyler's own family speaking truth. When Helen left an hour later, she hugged me gently at the door. "Protect her tomorrow," she whispered in my ear. "Always," I whispered back. Emma walked her aunt to the door, then came back to curl against me on the sofa like she hadn't done since she was a child. "Mom, what if I can't go through with the wedding?" she asked quietly. "Then you don't," I answered simply. "It's that easy. It's that hard, and it's that easy." She buried her face against my shoulder like she was hiding from the world. "I'm so scared of what people will think." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," I said, stroking her hair. "It's doing what's right despite being afraid." The clock in her apartment struck midnight, its chime echoing through the rooms like a countdown. 12 clear notes, steady and unrelenting. The sound felt like a warning that tomorrow the whole world would be watching and waiting. Emma lifted her head, eyes shining with both fear and a growing resolve I hadn't seen in months. "Mom, will you stay with me tonight? I don't want to be alone." I stayed without hesitation. I sat beside her until sleep finally took her away from her worries, her breathing soft and even like a child's. I watched her there, curled on the sofa under a soft blanket, and thought of Robert, thought of the promise I had made to him and to myself. Through the apartment window, the city glittered and sparkled, alive and indifferent to our small human drama. Inside, the only sound was the steady tick of the clock, each second carrying us closer to the day that would decide everything that mattered. And I knew then, whatever happened tomorrow, there would be no turning back from this moment. The morning of the wedding broke clear and sharp, the kind of April day when the sky looked scrubbed clean by angels. I woke early, though real sleep had never truly come to me. The old clock downstairs ticked into silence when I stopped it, not wanting its steady beat to remind me of the countdown to catastrophe. I dressed in my best navy dress with the small white flowers, the one I had worn to so many important moments. I pressed the fabric carefully, smoothing wrinkles that had formed over years of wear. My reflection in the mirror was not glamorous, but it was honest. A woman of 55, with lines carved deep by weather, work, and worry. By noon, I was standing outside Rosewood Gardens, the venue chosen by Tyler's wealthy family. White chairs lined the perfectly manicured lawn. Flower arches heavy with expensive blossoms created a fairy tale setting. Guests in tailored suits and designer dresses gathered in clusters like spilled jewels. Champagne glasses caught the sunlight and threw tiny rainbows. I kept to the edges of the crowd. Men like Tyler belonged naturally in this world of wealth and status. Women like me walked through it like ghosts, seen but not really noticed. Emma appeared at the head of the aisle, radiant in her grandmother's altered wedding dress. My throat tightened at the sight of her. My mother's lace, Emma's light, past and present sewn together with love and hope. When the officiant asked who gave this woman in marriage, I stood with all the pride I could gather. "I give her freely," I said, though my chest ached as if something inside had been carved out with a spoon. The vows were spoken with practiced perfection. The kiss was shared to polite applause that sounded rehearsed and controlled. Then came the reception, and with it, the moment I had been dreading. Crystal chandeliers hung above tables draped in linen white as fresh snow. The music swelled softly and elegantly, the kind you barely notice but can't escape from. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of wine, their movements choreographed to perfection. I found my place card at table 15, far from the head table, tucked between strangers and one elderly uncle. A placement designed not by accident, but by deliberate intent to put me in my place. I sat quietly, listening when spoken to, nodding politely, eating very little. The food was beautiful and meaningless, like decorations you can't taste. It was during the speeches that disaster struck like lightning. I rose to visit another table, a guest waving me over to hear some sweet story about Emma as a little girl. I reached for my chair to slide it back under me, and suddenly it was gone like magic. My knees buckled, my body pitched backward through empty air. Time moved like thick honey. The clink of champagne glasses cut off mid-note. Conversation strangled and died in throats. I hit the polished marble floor hard enough for the sound to echo beneath the glittering chandeliers like a gunshot. For a breathless moment, complete silence blanketed the room like snow. Then laughter scattered through the crowd, unsure and cruel. Above me stood Tyler, one hand still on the back of the chair he had yanked away from me. His smile was thin and sharp, a blade hidden behind perfect white teeth. "Oops," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the stunned room. "Looks like someone's a bit unsteady on her feet. Age catches up with all of us eventually." A few nervous chuckles answered him like an echo. Others gasped in shock and disbelief. Emma's cry rang out from across the room, sharp and panicked, cutting through the artificial laughter like a knife. Tyler leaned closer. His words pitched low enough for me to hear, loud enough for those nearby to catch every syllable. "Maybe you're more comfortable down there closer to the ground. Your place is on the floor where you belong." The words stabbed deeper than my physical fall. Around us, chairs scraped as people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The photographer lowered his camera, unsure if this moment belonged in the wedding album or should be forgotten forever. I stayed down longer than I needed to, not because I was badly hurt, but because I wanted the weight of that silence to sink deep into every heart present. Let them feel it, the guests, the family, even Tyler himself. Let them see what deliberate humiliation looked like when it wore a tuxedo and smiled. I pushed myself up slowly, every muscle aching, but my face remained calm as still water. My daughter reached me first, her wedding bouquet abandoned on the floor, her hands frantic and gentle on my arm. "Mom, are you okay?" I squeezed her hand softly. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Don't worry about me." But her eyes were wild with fury and shame combined. She looked at Tyler as though she was seeing him clearly for the very first time, and what she saw horrified her. And then came the sound that would change everything. Boot. The steady, purposeful sound of military boots cutting across the marble floor like a drumbeat. Not polished dress shoes, not rehearsed steps, but boots worn by someone who had walked through fire and lived to tell about it. The crowd turned as one toward the entrance. At the doorway stood a man in his early 60s, hair grayed at the temples, shoulders square despite the passing years. He was late to his own son's wedding, his tie slightly askew, but his presence commanded the room like a general arriving at the battlefront. His eyes scanned the scene quickly, taking it all in with a soldier's trained attention to detail. The guests frozen in shock, me rising from the floor with as much dignity as I could gather, Tyler standing smug and victorious above me like a conquering king. Then his gaze landed squarely on my face, and everything changed. He stopped cold in his tracks. The color drained from his weathered face like water from a broken dam. His lips parted in recognition and disbelief. "Ma'am," he breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "Is that really you?" The words were so quiet they might have been a prayer. Yet they silenced the room more completely than a shout ever could. I straightened my shoulders, turned to face him fully, letting recognition flash between us like lightning splitting the sky. Marcus Hale, Tyler's father. Memories exploded in my mind like fireworks. Desert Medical Tent 2003. The sound of helicopter rotors chopping the air. The sharp smell of antiseptic and fear. A soldier brought in with shrapnel in his chest, bleeding badly, trapped under enemy fire for hours. My hands working to save his life while bullets whistled overhead. His voice, rough with pain and gratitude, promising he would never forget the nurse who pulled him back from death's door. And now here he stood at his son's wedding, staring at me with the eyes of a man seeing his past collide head-on with his present like two trains on the same track. "Nurse Patricia," he said, his voice growing stronger, carrying across the silent room like a bell. Gasps rippled through the wedding guests like waves on water. Heads turned from him to me, from me to Tyler, creating a triangle of tension and revelation. Emma's grip on my arm tightened until her knuckles went white as paper. Tyler's face drained of color, the smugness slipping away like a mask falling to the floor. The room held its breath collectively. The string quartet had stopped playing entirely, their instruments frozen in midair like a photograph. I said nothing back to him yet. Some truths need silence to give them the weight they deserve. Marcus took a step forward, his voice rising now, carrying across the reception hall with the authority of a man used to being heard and obeyed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, and the reception stilled like a lake without wind. Forks were lowered to plates, conversations cut off mid-sentence. Even the air seemed to pause and listen. "This woman," he said, pointing to me with a hand that trembled with reverence and remembered gratitude, "is Nurse Patricia Collins. In 2003 in Iraq she saved my life under enemy fire. She risked everything to pull me back from the edge of death when everyone else thought I was already gone." The whispers that followed were not cruel or mocking. They carried words like hero and honor and sacrifice on their breath. Tyler staggered backward, his expensive chair clattering to the marble floor like his world crashing down. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out, as if his voice had been stolen. Emma looked at me with tears streaming down her cheeks, her face a mixture of pride and grief that broke my heart. And me. I simply stood steady and silent, letting the truth flood the room like sunlight after a storm. For years, Tyler had called me a simple woman. For months, he had tested, humiliated, and tried to break my spirit. But in that moment, under the crystal chandelier light, with a weight of memory and gratitude pouring from his father's voice, I was revealed as more than a simple woman. I was a veteran, a lifesaver, a mother, a survivor. And suddenly, all eyes were not on Tyler the golden boy, but on me, the woman he had tried so hard to diminish and destroy. The silence was so thick you could feel hearts beating like drums in the quiet. Marcus's words still hung in the air, his hand gripping my shoulder with the reverence of a man who had once looked death in the eye and lived only because another person refused to let him go. "This woman," he repeated, his voice firmer now, carrying across the room like a battle cry, "is the reason I am here today. The reason I had years with my late wife. The reason I watched my son grow up from boy to man. Without her courage and skill, there would be no family, no celebration, no wedding." The crowd shifted uncomfortably in their seats, chairs scraping softly as the weight of his words settled like stones in still water. Some guests pressed their hands to their hearts. Others bowed their heads slightly as if they had just been reminded they were in the presence of something much larger than champagne toasts and wedding cake. I felt Emma's hand clutch mine tighter, trembling like a leaf in a storm. I didn't look at her yet. My eyes stayed locked on Tyler, watching his perfect world crumble like a house of cards in the wind. He was pale as moonlight, his jaw clenched, his perfect posture finally broken and bent. For the first time since I'd known him, the mask of charm and control was completely gone, stripped away like paint in acid rain. He looked like a boy caught in a lie, cornered and desperate, with nowhere left to run or hide. The officiant stood awkwardly to one side, unsure whether this revelation belonged to the wedding ceremony or to something much more profound and life-changing. The band had lowered their instruments completely, recognizing that no music could compete with the truth being spoken. Then Marcus turned his gaze toward his son like a searchlight finding its target. "Tyler!" The name cracked across the room like a whip, sharp and unforgiving. Every eye in the room followed his gaze, landing on the groom who had just moments before tried to reduce me to nothing more than dirt on his shoes. Tyler stammered, lips moving but no sound escaping, like a fish pulled from water. "You humiliated this woman," Marcus continued, his voice growing louder with each word, anger controlled but razor-sharp. "The very woman who gave me my life back. You treated her as though she were beneath you, unworthy of basic human respect. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Tyler shook his head frantically, words finally tumbling out in a desperate rush. "I didn't know, Dad. I didn't realize who she was. I never meant. You didn't care to know." Marcus cut him off, stepping closer to his son. The guests were no longer watching a wedding reception. They were witnessing a reckoning, a moment of truth that would be remembered long after the flowers wilted and the cake was gone. I finally spoke, my voice calm and steady, carrying across the hall without effort despite its quietness. Respect isn't given based on someone's war record or their past achievements, I said simply. It's given because every human being deserves it. The words dropped into the silence like stones into deep water. Ripples spread across the faces staring back at me, understanding dawning in eyes that had been blind just moments before. Emma's tears fell freely now, but her eyes shone with pride brighter than her diamond ring. She squeezed my hand, and for the first time in months, I saw certainty growing in her expression like flowers after rain. Tyler tried once more, desperation making his voice crack like thin ice. Nurse Collins, Mrs. Collins, I am deeply sorry. I don't expect forgiveness, but please believe me when I say I love Emma with all my heart. Emma stepped forward before I could respond. Her voice stronger than I had ever heard it, clear as a bell ringing across water. Love doesn't look like what you did today, Tyler. Real love doesn't tear people down to build itself up. Her words rang with finality. He reached for her hand desperately, but she pulled it back like she was touching fire. I spoke again, each word measured and deliberate like stones being carefully placed. You wanted me on the floor, Tyler. But understand this, people like me don't stay there. We rise. And when we rise, we don't do it to crush others. We do it to lift up the people we love. The room erupted in applause that started slowly, then swelled like a tide. Guests rose to their feet, clapping not for the wedding, but for the truth that had finally been revealed. Tyler stood frozen in the storm of sound, his world of control and arrogance crumbling under the weight of history and honor. Emma took off her engagement ring slowly, deliberately, and placed it on the nearest table. The diamond that had sparkled like a promise now looked like nothing more than a pretty stone. Thank you for watching Grandma Stories. If you enjoyed this tale of courage and truth, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Every story deserves to be heard, and every person deserves respect. Until next time, remember that real strength comes not from putting others down, but from lifting them up.